I'd like to welcome you all back here into the crop paddocks on the Montana Flat. If you remember, we did a video earlier in the summer where we had Regan come and do visual soil assessments in our crops. We talked a little bit about what we're trying to achieve with our rooting depths and different species of plants, and now we're here seeing it in action in the winter. We've got our single ewes here, and so our sheep are on crop, our ewes are on crop specifically after scanning, and then we'll put our singles on and they'll stay on here. We feed it off in 2-day breaks. So every second day they'll get a shift in the dry weather, and once the weather becomes a little bit wet, we'll split them down into single day breaks so that they're getting an allocation of fresh feed every day, because unfortunately in the winter, especially in Southland, we get rain. When it rains, soil gets wet, we get dirty. Now, the good part about this grazing system is that even once we do get a little bit dirty in the rain, we actually stay above the ground. We avoid that pugging and compaction which you get when you've got the sort of more monoculture type of things. Like, we can look across here, and while it looks dirty, we'll be able to show you the regrowth in the other paddocks and what we achieve after. So it looks bad for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and then once that regrowth starts coming away, you'll notice there's absolutely no pugging on the ground, and we really can get away with it. So this stuff is good. So if we look down onto the ground here, we've got our Swedes. This is still the bulk of our crop. This is what we really want to perform and feed the sheep. Then we've got our chicory here, which is actually just starting to get a bit of a spring flush now. Unfortunately, chicory doesn't really like the winter, and neither does plantain. But they're starting to come away a bit now. We've got that's actually an old linseed plant there, which has well and truly done its dash. We've got an old Phacelia plant. Now we're actually seeing regrowth of the Phacelia in the paddocks now. The vetch is all vined on the ground here, and that's all done its dash, but it actually is breaking down now, and that's feeding the soil. But the vines also help to keep the stock off the ground, so that's another good thing about it. We've got a rye corn here, which effectively means we don't have to feed hay to the sheep because they're getting plenty of fibre in their diet. And then if we also look, we've got our brome grass, our prairie grasses and brome grasses, which we plant. And then we've got just wild re-sown grass that's just come away from the seed bank that's already in the ground. So it's a very balanced diet. It means we do not have to feed out on these paddocks, which saves a lot of tractor time, saves tractor ruts, and the sheep are happy and well fed. Now this is a 2-day break for our hoggets here. We've got about 1,020 hoggets on these breaks. This is a kale brew predominantly, with a very small amount of sweet in the bottom. The reason we put the sweet in the bottom is A, because we can, and B, because it's kind of nice to see the bulb. If there's still bulb, there's still feed, and it's kind of a good visual assessment of when you're looking, because the sheep don't actually like chewing the kale stalks right down to the ground. It can get a bit hard on their teeth. Especially at this time of year, our hoggets are actually cutting their teeth very shortly, so that's why we saved this kale brew to the end, when they're going to get a lot more leafy green rather than have to chew on hard bulb the whole time. And actually, we had 10 mil of rain last night, so if we pan down to the ground here, you can see it's pretty wet. And after 10 mil of rain, you'd expect it to be wet, but we are staying up on the ground. Although there's mud on top, there's no compaction. The sheep haven't gone through the top layer of soil at all. So this is really what we're trying to achieve with this, so that we don't have to come in with any cultivation when we're resowing. And that's one of our main goals here, is to cut the cultivation out of our winter crop mixes. And then if we pan around to the actual crop face here, we can see what's going on, and it looks pretty glorious. Now, I've estimated this crop at sitting around that 8-ton mark, and it's kind of eating out at about that 8.5-ton mark. So it's not bad for a direct drill crop of kale with no extra fertilizer on it. Kale is traditionally very nitrogen hungry. So yes, we could use N, and we could get maybe another 2 ton on this, but I'm pretty happy with the results without having to do that. And here we are in a regrowth paddock. Now this was the first paddock that we grazed in the winter. The hoggets came on here in about the second week of May, I believe, and this was a swede and turnip brew. Now, we graze our swede and turnip brews at the start of the winter because the turnips don't carry through the winter very far, but they produce a big bulb early on in the winter, so there's a bit of a compromise there. So if we pan down to the ground here, I can point you out a little bit of this regrowth and what's happening on here. So firstly, we have all this stuff here that's dying on the ground. Now that's all the stuff that helped hold the sheep out of the dirt. That's ryecorn stalks, that's vetch vines, and it's also dead grass and stuff like that too. We have the prairie grass that we plant is regrowing. We have the ryecorn that we plant is regrowing. That one there. We've got the chicory is regrowing. The plantain is regrowing. And here we have some interesting stuff. So this is actually self-sown. This isn't a regrowing plant. That's our self-sown Phacelia coming back away here. So one of the ideas here by keeping all this biomass growing is that we're still feeding all of the things in the soil, the biology, the earthworms, the bugs, all this decaying matter is feeding the fungi, and we're keeping that firing up until we're going to put new grass in here. And there's, if you may not be able to see it in the video, but all of this loose stuff, all of this loose dirt on top here, that's all worm casts, like all that. So this whole ground here is just a mat of worm casts, which shows that we've really kept those earthworms involved in this process. Now, as the spring hits, the weeds will start filling in any bare soil that is left. Particularly dandelion is one of the things that really, now dandelion actually serves that purpose. It has a very spread out growing leaf and it will cover that soil and protect it. That's the role of the dandelion. But unfortunately to that, it means that even though this looks great and we've trialed it in the past, you'd think, oh, we can just chuck seeds straight into this and we'll end up with an awesome pasture because we've already got so many things that we want. So we're still needing to use a chemical application to take out the weeds and the grass species that we don't need, and then we are coming in and we're putting in our permanent pasture mixes. And it's working very well, but even after our spray, most of this chicory and plantain will all survive.
And then go the standards, 1 at every 15 paces.
And then this also allows us to have a lot of extra feed in the spring. These paddocks here traditionally would be dirt until we finally got to them in October, or maybe even November actually by the time we started putting our grass in. So this paddock here, I'm going to put 50 rams in and it'll run them right through the spring. I've got another paddock of regrowth which we'll put all our wet dry ewes in, which will feed them through the spring. And then the later grazed paddocks, they'll be added into the rotation of the ewes and lambs and will help give us another buffer there in the spring. So it is a lot of extra feed and economically it's very good for us too. Now we tried it, after scanning, we try to keep all our twins and our triplets on grass for the majority of the winter. Sometimes if I have an extra bulk of crop, I'll put the twins on crop for maybe 2 weeks, which that's the one downside with our multi-species is that we don't quite get the tonnages that we used to get, so we haven't done much of that for a little while, but I'm going to put in a bit more crop next year, so that will allow me to do that if the grass is tight. But fortunately, we had a really good May here in Southland, which gave us a really good bulk feed supply coming into winter. It actually saved us because the rest of autumn was absolutely miserable. But these are our second cycle maternal ewes, and they, at the moment, because we're getting close to lambing, we're just having them on ad lib feed. They're getting as much as they can. They're being let back to water, and we're just trying to get them really ready for lambing time. But during the majority of the winter, we have our sheep on 2-day breaks. Part of their diet consists of baleage, so they might get 2 or 3 bales of baleage a day, and they'll get a grass break allocated as well. So depending on the paddock, we'll either do 2-day breaks or 3-day breaks. If the weather's fine, we get away with 3-day breaks because obviously the grass isn't getting dirty. But if the weather's a bit wetter, we'll do a 2-day break, so that way we're not losing as much of our grazing due to the wet weather.
And so winter feeding video wouldn't be complete without a trip out to see Trumpy and Old Major. We did get Trumpy back in eventually, so hopefully these two are like, you know, sort of eyeing each other up. And yeah, they've just grazed this polyculture paddock. Max absolutely turned it over. Hasn't exactly left the fine flat seed bed that a tractor might leave, but it's left us with something to work with. So we'll come up whether we might have to give it a pass over top, or else we can just scatter seed by hand or something. But that's sort of what we're thinking. And again, we sort of strip fed this, so they got a bit of fresh stuff, and I'll start feeding it that way a little ways. But we get into my black currants not too far, so that's about it for them. So I've just been giving them some Swedes as well. So it definitely feels like we're getting into spring. We had a bit of rain this morning, but it's been warm and overnight. So yeah, excited to be starting to get some seeds in the ground and have a whole bunch more content about what we're up to here for you guys coming right up. So enjoy. Hey, enjoy. Yeah.
I've never heard a pig make that sound.